Okay. So, a coach, a speaker, and a serial entrepreneur passionate about helping heart centered wellness coaches, healers, and influencers thrive in their business. Why? Because the better you do, the better the world does. These are the words of
Mm.
Jamie White, our guest on the show today. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah. So Jamie, tell me maybe if you start off like what kind of got you started doing what you're doing? What was like that point in life when you started off?
Interesting. It's a good question because it'll throw me
Yeah,
into a bit of a personal story.
sure.
And it's fair dues to you. I always think those introductions at the start of podcasts are challenging. And I always feel that like a couple of minutes into an interview, people will kind of get their own grasp.
Hmm.
For me, I took off in business really from like age 17, 18.
Wow.
I started hosting club nights.
Hmm.
Those soon turned to concerts, soon turned to
Mm.
conferences. I think they got very involved in online media, set up two magazines.
Hmm.
And I found myself at an interesting kind of point about age 25. I had 42 people working for me. I
Wow.
had about 20,000 people through events every week and
Wow.
a million readers of the magazine
20,000
every
every
week.
week.
So it was
Wow.
great.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
And now you're over in India. In on
Yeah.
our side, in Ireland, that's big,
Yeah.
and perhaps internationally it might not be too big. But
Hmm.
uh, you know what, that was great, and I did really well. But unfortunately, at that young age, sometimes when you get a bit too successful too soon, you get a bit arrogant, a bit cocky, a bit
Hmm.
stupid, and that unfortunately happened to me. I went up very fast, and then I came down very fast,
Hmm.
and I decided to work my way out.
Hmm.
So I could have gone bankrupt, and I thought, no, if I persevere through this, I'll learn a lot. I figured I was young. I kind of had this idea that all entrepreneurs pre-30 should be, shouldn't really be looking to cash in, but should more be looking to build themselves up, build character, build knowledge, build experience,
Hmm.
and so that story kind of backed up the idea of don't go bankrupt. Persevere through and let's learn as much as we can through this experience.
Hmm.
Um, it took me 5 years to, I basically went near £1 million in debt personally. And it took me about 5 years to address that.
Hmm.
And really, if I'm honest, I was probably burnt out at age 25.
Okay.
But I kind of had no choice but to keep kind of going on through. And And so what I did is I leaned on a lot of wellness types. I got into yoga. That was brilliant. I changed my diet. That was great. I got into all sorts of other therapies. And what they essentially did is they postponed an inevitable burnout. So I should have burnt out at age 25.
Hmm.
I couldn't. I had to pay my debts.
Okay.
I spent 5 years supported and propped up by all these kind of different coaches and therapists and counselors that I was working with. I paid all my debts and I checked into hospital a week later.
Wow.
And um, I found myself, unfortunately, very definitely had to just clear my slate, stop working for a little while,
Hmm.
and that was great. Sometimes I think I'm a big believer we all kind of race a little bit too fast in our careers, and
Hmm.
actually, um, I'm a big believer that kind of slow and steady actually is the way to go. And I was taking off like a rocket, and this was a good forced pause. So I came out of hospital. I was too stressed to work, so I had to kind of sell everything that I was involved in,
Wow.
and that was
Yeah.
nice. What I found, if I'm honest, was when I really sat into myself, I actually wasn't enjoying the work that I was doing.
Hmm.
I was doing it really because I had to pay debts. Um, and what I actually did really love was I loved all the different practitioners, the coaches,
Hmm.
the wellness types that I was working with. I was amazed at actually the joy, the relief, the support, the guidance that they had
Hmm.
given me in a time of need. Um, and I was like, I kind of had this thing. I was passionate to learn more, but I also saw something pretty obvious. So I had about 16 years sorry, I have 16 years entrepreneurial experience now, probably about 14 or 15 years at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I could see their business models needed a bit of help.
Mm.
And I could see that I could use the business experience that I had in terms of bringing things up and then managing things in terms of them going down and making things right. I could use that business experience to complement those that were doing real good. So coaches, as you touched on, coaches,
Mm-hmm.
healers, and influencers. There's a lot of wellness influencers that have huge reach, but don't necessarily know what to do with it. And
Mm.
so I found myself working with these types where a lot of them are heart centered. And what I mean by that is that they're doing what they do because they love it. They're not necessarily doing what they do because, you know, there's a logical mind inside their brain thinking, let's make loads of money here.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love doing is pairing up with those types that, as I said, passionately lead with their hearts, not necessarily their heads, and coming in and supporting them to complement their business with a really good complementing business model.
Mm.
So anyway, that's
Yeah.
quite an introduction I've given.
Yeah.
I've kind of gone around
Sure.
and left you open to question into numerous
Yeah.
areas. But I thought I'd keep things broad for the moment, and you ask however you feel comfortable from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. So did you find any, like you mentioned, you went through a phase where you kind of cut down on stuff. So that's quite interesting. So did you actually delve into uh, like minimalist life, or was there something that helped, or did you touch into it?
Yeah, well, do you know what? So I actually went so broke
Hmm.
uh, that I thought if you met me 24, 25, I was Ireland's best young entrepreneur. I was like top 30 under 30. I was making, you know, I thought I was making a lot of money.
Hmm.
And then suddenly I found out actually, no, the figure was actually 768,000 personally liable. And I, the business was quite public, so a lot of people knew that as well. And so I found myself uh, quite publicly embarrassed, if I'm honest,
Hmm.
and and I wanted to address it as quickly as possible. So uh, I cut like I really couldn't pay myself anything. There was no money to. I literally had to just
Yeah.
do what I could to survive.
Okay.
Um, so I had a nice fancy apartment. I let that go. Moved back
Hmm.
home. Had a nice car. Sold that. And I wanted to address those debts as quickly as possible. So this even went as far as me selling off DVDs through
Oh wow.
Amazon. Like you name
Yeah.
it, I sold everything.
Okay.
And and so you know, as I said, like I'm a big believer that things don't happen to you; they happen
Yeah.
for you. And I do feel that, as I said, like you have success at a young age, and you'll that's obviously off the back of some good, but it can sow in some bad mistakes, and you can get a bit cocky, get a bit
Hmm.
arrogant, and that sudden vump for me was very very cleansing. Insofar as you know, it stopped me in my tracks.
Hmm.
It really had me lighten my load as such in terms of the home, the car, the even literally DVDs.
Yeah.
Just I cut out. I sold everything I could, and then because I couldn't pay myself a wage, my mum was very good. She reintroduced pocket money for me, which was pretty demoralizing thinking
Hmm.
where I was, but she was so good.
Hmm.
And that was to eat.
Yeah.
So I just suddenly all my priorities flipped.
Hmm.
And as a result of that, I I actually found great freedom. There's a line in the movie Fight Club. I don't know if you're familiar with
Hmm.
it, but Brad Pitt's
Oh yeah.
character, he's called Tyler
Yeah.
Durden. He talks very well about how we don't own things; things own us,
Hmm.
and that's something that I've been very conscious of. Um, and so, yeah, I think very consciously about whatever it is that I
Hmm.
buy, um, and uh, and what is it there to compliment me, or does it kind of complicate things?
Hmm.
and uh, and so yeah, I've kind of followed a minimalistic perspective with regards to belongings firstly, but that actually that's kind of developed out. It kind of has this ripple out effect where suddenly you start thinking about, wait, what about what about my business field? And I can look back and think, God, I was doing a lot. So now I'm very very clean in terms of
Hmm.
I want to do um, well, there's that cliche phrase of less is more, and for me, I'm very conscious of spreading myself too thin. So it's this constant exercise of, yeah, pursuing
Hmm.
minimalism and concentrating down so you can show up as your most, not
Yeah,
diluted.
so it's interesting. So you're saying it's actually something you've applied in life as well as in business,
Yeah.
uh, as well as in like
Yeah.
eating, health, everything. So it's like your belongings. There's a minimalist way, as well as your business. There's a minimalist way to run the business. So that.
Yeah, you see, I think a lot of us are funny insofar as we like to segment things and we like to say, this is how I am
Hmm.
personally, this is how I am professionally.
Mm.
But from everything I've learned, how we are
Yeah.
personally reflects itself in how we show up
Yeah.
professionally. And so the two are completely intertwined. I really believe that if you haven't actually just taken time to really learn to work with yourself and master
Hmm.
yourself, for whatever professional success you may achieve, it's going to be very short lived. Um, Whereas when you actually have a solid footing and foundation in yourself personally, you've taken time to learn how to work with yourself. I actually think professional success, business success, it just comes as a byproduct.
Mm.
I really think that so few people take the time they should to work on themselves, that when they do, it is just such a competitive advantage above all else.
Mm.
And that's something that I really, really try to share in the work that I do. That
Hmm.
I always think it's fascinating how sometimes it's the smallest of tweaks in a personal life that can actually start to ripple out and have quite dramatic shifts in a professional capacity.
Mm.
So yeah, for
Yeah.
me, it's all personal.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, yeah, that's something I noticed as well. A lot of people tend to see it as two different things: your professional and personal life, and it's not necessarily the case. If you want to like experience the full strength of life, you probably need to find that connection between them and be able to combine them, isn't it?
Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. Like, at the heart of it, people work with people. And I think, if we go back 10, 20
Yeah.
years, there was a kind of an ideal that managers should lead by
Hmm.
example, and to a point should almost be inhuman.
Mm.
Um, they should be absolutely
Hmm.
perfect. Uh, Whereas I think actually quite nicely, the kind of general population has kind of moved towards, we like to relate. We like to know who it is that we're working with.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, I think if people like to know who they work with and want to work with people that they want to work with, well, then it really suggests a worthwhile investment in
Hmm.
ourselves to bring a greater state of peace, of fun, of relaxed
Mm.
state to us,
Yeah.
rather than, yourself. If you see somebody overly stressed,
Yeah.
they're not too fun to
Yeah.
work with. If you see somebody kind of a bit nervous and you don't know what they'll do, you don't really want to work with them
Mm.
either. Whereas if someone's peaceful, if they're grounded, if they're strong, if they're clear communicating, those are all very attractive qualities in work.
Hmm.
And so there's something very, as I said, there's something when you tap into that that gets very, very exciting about personal work or personal
Hmm.
development.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's really interesting. So, I actually had two questions regarding the past life you explained. So it sounds like you had this
Okay, yeah,
kind of exponential growth going from like just starting out at 17, 18 into promoting and all that to getting up to a big business by the time you were 25. So
yeah,
that's something. So I'll tell you the both the questions first. So first question is like, okay, so what are the sort of maybe two three key elements that helped you scale that up that big that in a short time?
yeah,
And the second question is, you mentioned you ended up in a big debt as well afterwards. So was there
yeah.
something you could have done differently, or like if somebody else was in your situation they could have done differently?
Yeah. So for me, there's a kind of a background. So I got into club nights a bit
Mm-hmm.
originally, and they came off the back of, I was in boarding school.
Mm-hmm.
I was in an all boys boarding school where we got out once
Mm-hmm.
a month. So from age 12 to 18, I was just surrounded by
Mm-hmm.
men, and I really wanted to go out.
Yeah.
Every weekend came, and I felt so sad about the parties that people
Yeah.
were going to, the discos. I thought, do you know what? When I get to college, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
different. And I felt that. yeah, when I get to college, it's going to be different. And when I eventually got to college, it actually wasn't great. There was no
Yeah.
parties. For some reason, something was wrong, but there was no fun
Yeah.
parties. So I probably was so frustrated
Hmm.
that I just said, you know what? It's okay. I'm going to host my own. And very organically, without any initial want to make money, but just to actually have fun and to provide the fun that I really like authentically for me, I was like, this needs to be there. So I felt such a strong space or gap in
Hmm.
myself. And I took initiative to realize it for fun and for enjoyment. Um, but it did very well. I remember not knowing how much money I would make, and at the end of it, I think I made €5,000. And the owner, like, he handed me and said, "Thank you." So I had the most fun.
Yeah.
All my friends were there; it was amazing. And then the owner handed me the money and said,
Yeah.
"Thank you, that's amazing. Could you do it?"
Wow.
And I was kind of in awe. I was like, "Wow,
Yeah.
I didn't expect I'd be making
Yeah.
this." Okay,
Of
yeah,
course.
yeah, I'll
Yeah.
come back to you. So I think when I reflect back, my call for that space was very, it was very aligned with where I was at. It was very authentic to me. And I replicated it again and thought, this is great, and did it again. And this is great. And then suddenly I was like, well, do you know what? If I'm doing it once, why can't I do it twice?
Hmm.
So I did one party, then the next month I did another party, the next month I did two, the next month I did three or four, and so on and so forth until I was doing 30 of them a week. And the scaling came very naturally.
Hmm.
The growth felt very kind of logical, very simple. And so I definitely think that if you I think sometimes we get a bit distracted by money and distracted by trying to make a quick win.
Hmm.
Whereas in actual fact, if we just actually follow our hearts, if we're like, what's missing? Like, what would bring more joy, more fun, more excitement to my life? Is there an opportunity in that?
Hmm.
And oftentimes there is. And and if you find that opportunity, why not do it again? And why not do it again? I think there's a lot of things that people feel that you should have to work hard for your money, and yeah, of course you should. But you can also make money doing what you love, and and that
Hmm.
good money should be hard earned is true in a lot of circumstances, but it also can be earned easily.
Hmm.
Um, and so for me, as I said, that kind of grounding in a passion space, in a space of like a real want, a desire,
Hmm.
um, is something, and then that scaling up is cool. Now the demise of what I did came very interestingly.
Hmm.
I was making more money in a week at that stage than most would in a year,
Wow. Hmm.
and still I would bump into family members and extended family members, and they'd say, "Jamie, are you still hosting kiddie discos?
Okay.
When are you going to do something?
Yeah.
When are you going to
Yeah.
do something a bit more
Yeah.
respectable?" And I didn't know how much I was earning and how much that was relative to other people. So I didn't one appreciate actually the
Hmm.
success. And I think that's really important, that in business you have to be your own best champion. You need to be your own biggest supporter. You need to acknowledge the hard work you're doing and the excellent work you're doing. I didn't.
Hmm.
You need to appreciate what you're doing, and respect it. And I didn't. I actually lost respect because of the impression of others around me.
Hmm.
And as a result, I started moving away from the stuff that was making me money. And I set up a marketing agency that did nothing but take up time and lose money.
Hmm.
And I did that a few times. And as I concentrated on these things that looked really good, and my extended family went, "Wow, Jamie, that looks very good." And I
Yeah.
remember thinking to myself, "This is hilarious. You think this is good, and I'm losing money here, and you thought these were shit, and I'm making
Yeah.
all my money here." I remember that in my mindset, but I didn't register it enough to say, stop performing to others, close this stuff down, go back to what you're good at.
Hmm.
Um, and so if I was summarizing what
Hmm.
happened, I lost respect for what was making me my money. I started working for other people, not necessarily myself, in terms of performing. And ultimately, I lost focus.
Hmm.
And the thing about, I think people always wonder, how do big businesses lose big money? It's the scale. You know, you can make money fast, but you can lose money fast. And you know, if you have a bad month and you have 42 mouths to feed,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
you'll rack up a lot of debt very quick. And especially, you know, when you have that kind of scale, you have access to credit, you have access to slow down whoever it is that you're going to pay,
Mm-hmm.
and so you can lean back a little bit until you can't, and when you can't, there's a lot of pressure built up, and so unfortunately, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way I'd answer into that for you. I hope there's some good value for your listeners out of
Yeah.
it.
No, that's really interesting because this is like something I noticed in amongst many successful lives. They went through this sine wave where you went up and then you went down and then you went up again, and
Yeah,
it's I think it's better to have been there, done that, than to have never tried. Uh, so I know it's a difficult
yeah.
experience sometimes, but sometimes you need to go through it. It helps in
No,
life.
it's like
Yeah.
as I said, like I came to kind of a mindset of I was like, I'm under the age of
Hmm.
30. Everything is here to serve me.
Yeah.
I really believe, yeah, as I said, that things don't happen to you; they happen for
Hmm.
you. Um, Now, there's a certain point at it. For me, it was 30, where you pull up your socks and you really, you know, you stop welcoming in those hard lessons, and you start actually pre navigating away from them before they could turn up. You start really working a lot more attentively. But for me, as I said, pre 30, I was like, I see myself as very lucky to learn that lesson at an early
Hmm.
stage. Um,
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Is there any sort of success secrets you can talk about from, like, maybe a daily habit or something in health or in life that you do regularly that you find
Yeah,
can
no,
benefit?
absolutely. So I think we've actually touched on a
Yeah.
number of them already. The very first is that I really believe people should prioritize themselves
Hmm.
first. I think unfortunately a lot of us get distracted by life, by our family, our social
Hmm.
circles, work, and it takes real courage and bravery to push them away
Mm.
and to give yourself time to work on yourself. And what I mean by that is understand how we think, understand our weaknesses, understand our
Hmm.
strengths, and become our biggest supporter. Um,
Mm.
so I think that's very important. I kind of see with a lot of the younger entrepreneurial types that they don't just have a business; they have 10 businesses.
Hmm.
We really honed in on that idea that less is more.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the success rates of startups are miserable. About 9 in 10 fail in the first year. 9 of the subsequent 10 that get through fail in their second year.
Mm.
Um, and so, to increase your chances of success, uh, the real thing is to not spread yourself too thin, but instead raise your standards and concentrate on what has the most efficient chance of success. I think that's really important. So less is more.
Mm.
And then in a kind of time that we're in now, where everybody is trying to make a fast buck, you know, they're trying to be a millionaire in 90 days.
Mhm.
And for me, my whole thing is slow and steady. When everybody is playing the short game, it's a competitive advantage to be thinking differently and playing the long game.
Mm.
So for me, that's really key.
Yeah.
So focus in on yourself. Less is more. Slow and
Yeah.
steady. Um, and that those are like kind of those three. You know, if someone was saying, give me broad ranging good compliments to success that will
Mhm.
reach across all areas, yeah,
Mm.
that's where I'd be going. We could go into a hell of a lot more detail if you like,
Yeah.
but I suppose
Yeah.
nice to it's a
No,
bit broad.
I see. It's quite interesting because when you look at it from the outside, uh, a successful person's path, it looks like they're growing fast. But you're talking from the inside, it's actually a slow and steady
Mhm.
push, and that eventually ends up like that. But it's not the intention. It kind of happens automatically, naturally, as opposed to pushing it to that. So.
Yeah, like when I nosedived, and when I was kind of, to be fair, I was really with my back up against the wall. I did lose a bit of confidence in myself, and I thought, right, do you know what? I want to study success. I want to sit down with every entrepreneur I can get my hands on and figure out what worked for them versus what
Mhm.
didn't. And what I really found value in was the patterns of both success and failure in terms of what stands out here, what's really working for people versus what's not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that slow approach, I could see like younger entrepreneurial types that really weren't doing well, racing to get things done. And I met some entrepreneurial types in their late 60s, late
Mm-hmm.
70s even, playing a long game.
Oh yeah.
And I
Yeah.
found that very, very
Yeah.
inspiring. Um, I think there's a great there's a great saying in the kind of the more stocks and trading investment
Mm-hmm.
space, where they say if you want to be successful, look at what everybody else is doing and do the opposite.
Mm.
And I do think it's a funny one, just seeing how many people are trying to get rich quick. um and that's not, if you take just money out of the equation, it's lots of people are trying to fall in love quick, lots of people are trying to get healthy quick,
Mm.
lots of people are trying to get peaceful quickly.
Yeah.
These meditation
Yeah.
hacks, yogic hacks.
Yeah.
And I think when we just take pressure off ourselves to say, look, do you know what, let's stop the race here, let's slow down a little bit, there's this ripple out effect of like, you take the pressure off your back, you start to be able to relax a little bit, be able to make decisions from a more relaxed state, you're making less decisions, suddenly you make them better. And as I said, just that slow and steady approach just has this unbelievable um, ripple out effect, or butterfly effect, of creating lots and lots of different decisions as a result,
Mm.
and that puts you in a much more complementing space. So that's for me, when I like. So I do a lot of work now, really consulting and
Mm-hmm.
coaching people. And what I love uh, is this idea of, if you plant a couple of seeds like those ideas, um, they in themselves sort out a hell of a lot of the other problems. And I think that's the genius. I think in worlds like
Mm-hmm.
mine, it's not about solving every problem. It's if you can get to the heart of the thoughts that create the
Mm-hmm.
problems. You'll give somebody a very, very efficient transformation, and that's what I'm kind of always trying to go for.
Mm. Yeah, that's very true. You're right, because I noticed that uh, in many things. I mean, there was a mention from Keith Cunningham, who is like the rich dad from the Rich Dad Poor Dad, and yeah, one of the things he said was like, yes, if you are learning to swim, as an example, you're not going to learn it in just one session. It's nearly
Mm.
impossible. Or if you're just learning to walk, like as a child, it doesn't happen immediately. You just keep trying, falling, trying, falling, and eventually you get there. So it's with
Yeah.
everything. It's not just learning to walk or learning to swim or learning to make money. Everything is like a gradual process. So you have to just allow yourself that moment to, yeah.
There's an interesting surrender as well. Most parents know that if they just let their kids be, eventually they'll get up on their own 2 feet.
Mm,
And I think if we as entrepreneurial types could actually just relax into ourselves and have a bit of faith in ourselves, and just know that, what, if we keep showing up as our best selves, if we make decisions from a more relaxed state, a more confident
mm,
state, it's just a matter of inevitability.
yeah.
It's inevitably going to happen. If you keep doing your best and keep making the right decisions day in, day out,
Hmm.
that success that you want just becomes an inevitable.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's a lot of types that are doing that, but they've this fear that it's not going to happen, and that fear starts to percolate through everything, and they start making decisions out of
Hmm.
fear, rather than just the right decisions that they should for them then and there. Um,
Mm,
that's a space I'm really, really interested in. Just that idea of just having
yeah.
this faith in ourselves, this belief in ourselves that things will go our way.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned about your trainings and coachings. So how do you actually uh, approach a person who comes in for coaching, and how long does it take you to make that transformation in them?
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Really good question. So I really believe most people are their own worst
Mm-hmm.
enemy. Um, and so the duration for a transformation is actually, it's completely relative to where somebody's
Mm-hmm.
at. On the other side of that, what I really believe is that no one can be a better coach to themselves than
Hmm.
themselves. They just need the tools to reconnect. They need the tools to reconnect with their self leadership, their self initiative, their problem solving nature. And so my approach is it varies between
Hmm.
clients, but it's very simple that I meet people where they're at, um, and help to create a safe space for people to dive into themselves and to think differently,
Mm.
um, and as a result of that different thoughts, see things differently. And if they see things differently, perhaps then opportunities come up to do differently. And so creating a safety around those
Hmm.
spaces and support and strength in behind pursuing a new way of being. And by that, I mean new decisions, new patterns. Um, and honestly, like I've had a client that literally we worked, and in their first month, they earned more in that first month than they did in the prior year.
Mm. Oh.
And to be honest, I've had a client that my duration with most clients is 4 months.
Hmm.
After the 4 month period, they were earning less, but they were so much happier.
Mm.
They were earning less. They were working so much less. They went from kind of working like 16-hour days to working three
Oh,
hours a
wow.
day. And uh, and that for me was like they really didn't need to be earning the money that they were earning.
Hmm.
They were tied up in a pattern of work, 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 and really what was crying out for attention and where the success, where the breakthrough will
Hmm.
be familial life, home life, balance, their own personal life. So you know sometimes things can change in an instant, and other times things take time. It really depends on the person, and then sometimes there's huge sensitivities around everything, so they need that time, they need that space, they need that support. And other times people actually need to break chains quickly.
Hmm.
So the
Yeah.
key in my approach is meeting someone where they're at, and and having essentially a bespoke approach. There's a lot of like that's my way of doing things. There's a lot of others that like this, like well, here's my 5 step program, here's my 10 step
Hmm.
program. And for me, I think things are a little bit more complicated than that. And so I like, as I said, to meet somebody where
Hmm.
there's at, create a kind of a bespoke plan of action, and follow through then from there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So the more you can get to relax into the process, the easier it is to find that solution and path to get to where you need to get to.
So
Okay.
yeah,
And
yeah.
what's your sort of goal in the future in like 5 years, 10 years, or where do you want to get to?
Yeah, really, really good
Mm.
question. This is something that I found myself in a bit of a challenging debate
Okay.
on, because for me, I am so happy right
Hmm.
now, and I don't necessarily like getting too distracted by the future. So I'm
Hmm.
34, and so it's like, Jamie, when are you going to settle down? When are you going to get
Hmm.
married? What about kids?
Mm.
Um, Work wise, what is there something bigger you're going to do? And I think those decisions can become quite paralyzing,
Mm.
and they can very much take you out of the present. So for me, all my practice, my own personal spiritual practice, my own professional practice, everything has been to try and get me more present. And I kind of really subscribe to this idea that if you show up at your best,
Hmm.
make the most out of the day ahead of you, and set yourself up to be just that little bit, that 1% better off tomorrow, um, that you know what, you don't have to worry about 3 years time or 5 years time. Things will beautifully unfold. Just have
Hmm.
faith. And and so it's a bit of a different answer to
Yeah.
most, because the real development, the growth space is all about 5 year plans, 10 year
Hmm.
plans. And for me, I'm like, no, no, no. I'm just going to distract myself with what's immediately speaking in front of me, with the faith and confidence that things will look after themselves.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, and yeah. So I hope that wasn't
Yeah.
an underwhelming or frustrating answer,
No,
but
it's interesting.
it's actually very challenging to hold
So
on to
you're
that.
saying like it's almost like you'd like to let it flow and then just focus on the experience.
Exactly. Exactly, because like nobody would have seen COVID coming, and COVID has turned a lot of people's worlds upside
Hmm.
down. Um, and that massively disrupted 2 year plans, 4 year plans, 5 year
Yeah.
plans. Um, but in the present of it, there's a lot of people. They say the highest transfers of wealth take place in times like now. more startup start, um, and a lot of big businesses fail. So for me, it's just that there's such value and opportunity in being present
Mm,
versus distracted. There's such expectation on goals that sometimes those expectations can be overly burdensome.
mm-hmm.
And so, as I said, like the distractive nature of long-term goals,
Yeah.
I think the benefit.
Hmm.
Yeah, outweighs the benefits, and the benefits of being present,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
the opposite of benefit.
Yeah. No, that's very 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 insightful. Actually, that's it's a very good way of looking at life and kind of being able to progress. It's almost like it's a past, present, and future is like one point. The way you're describing it. Mm.
Well, I just think that like I feel that a lot of people, when you really check in with them, their head is either anchored in the past into something traumatic that's happened, something
Mm.
challenging, or maybe a goal. You know, oh, those years back were so fantastic
Mhm.
that they've just lost themselves in the now. And the same is true with the future. Yeah, do you know what? I'll sacrifice
Mm.
today. Today will be miserable, but it'll make sense tomorrow. And that tomorrow has a funny way of always being tomorrow. So for me, as I said, I just think there's huge therapy in just making the most out of today. And I'm a big believer in the kind of momentum and a compounding effect that if you have a good day today, it's all the easier to have a better day
Mhm.
tomorrow, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Versus when you have a bad day today, I think it's all the easier to have a worse day tomorrow. Um,
Yeah.
and it's very hard to have a good day following a bad day. So there's something in that
Yeah.
similarly as well that I kind of like to encourage people to think
Oh
into.
yeah. Yeah. That is true actually. Um, okay. I guess if you can maybe tell a little bit about your travels. You've done a fair bit of travels. How do you actually decide where to be when? Because and now it's like so challenging as well to be able to travel. How do you manage all that?
Yeah, do you know what? Now, actually, if you oversubscribe to the media a little bit too much, you would think that we were all stuck in our
Hmm.
spots. But you can actually travel. Um, Now, uh, for me, I didn't buy a home. I put the money that I would have spent on a home into investments.
Hmm.
Um, I felt that investments would perhaps outperform um, a home, I'd be very interested in financial
Hmm.
wellness. I also felt that a home would anchor me, and I really think we have a big world. There's a lot out there. It's a beautiful thing to get to explore and get to see. So um, that is kind of like one key thing that like I didn't anchor myself down with a home, put the money into
Hmm.
investing. I um, I moved my work, so I had a lot of staff. As I rebuilt things, I made sure that I could work from anywhere I wanted through my laptop, and so I made my work mobile.
Wow.
And I
Hmm.
also looked into the kind of the company taxes, and it's very, very complementing to travel.
Hmm.
So with that, um, as COVID really kind of locked Ireland down, which is
Hmm.
where my home, I
Hmm.
suppose, um, I moved to Bali, which was really beautiful because things were a lot more relaxed there. There's also some fascinating young entrepreneurs out there.
Hmm.
It's a very interesting kind of startup community.
Hmm.
So I moved there. I've recently come to the UK. UK has just opened up from
Yeah.
lockdown. Beautiful space, kind of real lovely energy to be in at the
Hmm.
moment. So I'm working from here. And honestly, when it comes to like where's next, for me, I don't try to plan too far ahead. So maybe a week, 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I know I'm here for 2 weeks. I don't know where I'm going to next.
Wow.
Uh, Funnily enough, something interesting always comes up,
Hmm.
and I might stay here longer. I might move on. Um, and that actually is I think a lot of people, the world is spinning, the world is moving, things are always going in different directions, and I think when you try to stay
Yeah.
put, it'd be quite challenging.
Yeah.
But it's the done thing. It's what the majority of the masses do. Whereas for me, I think, and it goes back to this minimalist conversation that we were having earlier, the lighter you can make yourself and the more you can start to flow with the energies of the world, I think that kind of complements
Hmm.
opportunities. And so for me, that's something that I've really tried to do. So, I lighten my load in terms of my possessions,
Hmm.
mobilize my work and financial setup, and then engage with the flow of what might come. So don't, as I said, like don't get distracted by long ambitious goals. Just think in the present, make the most, and go from there.
Hmm.
Now there's a lot of initiative, a lot of
Yeah.
leadership. You know, you can't get too distracted. So it might, in some parts it might sound very nice, but there also is quite a weight of responsibility in it. But that's just, this is my practice for now.
Hmm.
It might very well change in a couple of months or a couple of
Yeah.
years, but it's just something that I felt was a nice thing to do for where I am. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, for where I am right
That's
now.
awesome. That's yeah, that's so cool because I had a phase earlier where I was doing similar, like just kind of letting the travels flow as it's coming, and it's very interesting when you let it flow because as you're saying, it's like if you can cut your kind of overheads down, it's so much easier to be able to do that, and that's an amazing experience to be able to do that actually. So it's good. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like you know what ooh, I'm just seeing here my laptop's about to die, so I'm just gonna get
Okay, sure,
a
sure. I'll
charger
just
here.
pause this. Yeah.
But I do think that like it's easier than people
Yeah.
think. It's just it's not the done thing.
Hmm.
So because it's not familiar, people get a little bit intimidated by
Hmm.
it. But yeah, no, I'm really enjoying it for where I'm at
Hmm.
right now, and I'd really encourage others too. Like the world's a big place,
Yeah.
and so it's worth a little bit of thought to see
Yeah.
uh, how could you engage with it a little bit more. 2 seconds now. I'll
Yeah.
just have this
Sure.
plugged
Sure.
in.
Okay. No problems. Yeah. Yeah. We are back in. Yeah. That's pretty cool. So, what's the best way for people to, the viewers and listeners, to kind of get in touch with you? Is that okay for you to, if people? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure,
Yeah.
sure. That's why we have these chats
Sure.
to reach
Yeah.
others, and and yeah, if anybody kind of feels
Yeah.
called, if anybody feels connected, I'm Jamie White, so
Hmm.
JamieWhite, and so I have the domain jamiewhite.com.
Okay.
On Instagram, I'm at Jamie White,
Hmm.
and my email is hello@jamiewhite.com.
Nice.
So
Okay.
any of those
Yeah.
three
Yeah. I'll.
are ideal, and I
Hmm.
really, yeah, I was just going to say, I really enjoy, like, it's always interesting after conversations like these just to
Yeah.
hear what people thought. Sometimes things aren't that positive, and others sometimes things really
Yeah.
connect. So for however people are feeling, please feel free and welcome to
Yeah.
connect with me.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll throw in the details on our show notes as well. So yeah. So
Thank you.
thank you, Jamie White, for yeah being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
My, my pleasure, Liam.